Hey there, units of fluffaliciousness, what's going on? Today, we're going to talk about the differences between characters and fursonas. Is there really a difference between a character and a fursona? What are those differences, and why should you care? That's what we're going to talk about today. So yes, there is a big difference between a fursona and a character. Let's talk about fursonas first. Now, fursonas are kind of a more common thing in the Western furry scene. So other than, well, obviously the appearance, fursonas typically share a lot with the person underneath. Hobbies, interests, orientation, adult interests, political leanings, religion, everything typically, well, makes its way into the fursona as well. Now, people may make some changes in terms of appearance and things like that. Maybe there's something that you don't like about the way you look that you want to change with your fursona. There's nothing wrong with that. Maybe you want your fursona to be you, but to have big muscles or something like that, or to be taller. There's certainly nothing that says you can't make little tweaks like that, but for the most part, a fursona is still an expression of you. Okay, now let's talk about what a character is and how that's different. Now, it may seem pretty obvious, but I think it's worth discussing. There is a big difference. Just like an actor or actress might play a character on TV, that character is generally not them. They may bring some of their personality or other quirks and things into the character, but typically they're playing a role. The same thing with an author writing a book or a short story or a play or anything like that. Those characters don't represent who the author is as a person. Now, the character concept in terms of the furry fandom typically pops up more in the Eastern furry scene, kind of like the kimono scene and stuff like that. To give you an example of the difference, if you were a fursona, people would refer to you pretty much all the time by your fursona name, even if you weren't in your fursuit or you weren't in a convention or you weren't in a furry chat or something like that. If you were more of a character, people would probably call you by your regular name when you were out of your fursuit or not expressing yourself and not acting out that character. Okay, so another example. One of my oldest friends in the furry fandom describes himself as me, just a dog. Like, that's literally it. That is the absolute definition of a fursona. It's just him expressed as an anthropomorphic character. He tends to be very vocal about politics and things like that on his furry social media because it's him. Now, I'm very different on the other hand. My characters are just that, characters. They came from my imagination and they don't necessarily really represent me. They come from another world. They have their own culture, their own art, their own language, their own clothing. They're part of a fantasy story that I made up, and obviously they break canon somewhat to come and talk to you on these videos. You know, this obviously isn't some fantasy world, it's right here where we live. You gotta make some concessions. But Riv, Lurks, and later Kiri came to me as characters. They were never meant to be an expression of me as an anthropomorphic animal. They were anthropomorphic animals that I created as part of a literary project that I was going to start 4 years ago now, and I haven't written a word of it. So why does this matter? Well, it's good to understand our differences, and it's good to understand that maybe some of your friends might have a different perspective on the furry fandom than you do, in terms of their character representing them or representing just a fantasy. The biggest example where I've seen it actually cause some problems is in the realm of social media, specifically what you say and what you don't say on your furry social media. Let me tell you a story. It was summer of 2020. Not only was COVID ravaging the US and the rest of the world, but we had a lot of other stuff going on at the same time. The George Floyd incident happened, and I, as in the person underneath the character, was as appalled as most people were by that incident. But I wasn't being vocal about it on my furry social media. It never occurred to me that I should be. I mean, after all, the social media accounts were there specifically for my characters and not for me, the person. And after a while, a couple of my friends approached me and were like, hey, what's up with the silence on this? I haven't seen anything about Black Lives Matter. I haven't seen anything acknowledging that this is even happening on your furry social media. And my first reaction was like, what? Why would I put that there? This is my characters. And I actually put that out on Twitter like, hey, this account is for my characters, not for me. They don't really have opinions on contemporary human world issues or politics or things like that. Give me a break. And I realized that the whole character versus persona discussion was central to that misunderstanding. I suddenly realized that people were beginning to wonder if I might have a really bad opinion on some of the stuff that was going on just based on my silence. And that wasn't the case at all. It was the fact that my characters are characters that don't represent me. My personal social media, as in the human underneath the suit, was the place for me to express my opinions on stuff like that. There were then, and there are still to this day, some people who sort of make that assumption that if you're not vocal about something, or you say, I don't want to talk about politics, or the furry fandom is an escape to me, this is not really the place for me to be discussing these kind of things, they sort of make the assumption that you probably have a bad take on things, at least in their definition. Now, I've shared my personal political beliefs before. Nothing that should be controversial in the furry fandom. I took a little test. I'll show you right here where I stand on the political spectrum. But I just didn't understand that there was an expectation to speak out on the matter, just because of the way that I perceived my characters not really being a representation of the human underneath. So that was a good learning experience. It's a learning experience for both sides. If you are more of a persona than a character, understand that some of your friends whose characters are characters may not be vocal about contemporary world events or politics or things like that, not because they have a bad opinion on things, just because they don't see it being relevant to the way they're expressing themselves in the fandom. And on the other side, there are people like me. You need to understand that the reason some of your friends are probably putting a bunch of political stuff and a bunch of stuff about their adult interests out there on social media and places like that is because it's a persona that very much represents them as a person and has the same interests, the same opinions, and wants to express those. Both are absolutely valid. Now, I'm sure there's more to discuss. If you have any other ideas about characters versus personas, let us know in the comments. What are you, a character or a persona? Are you somewhere in between the two? I bet there's a lot of people out there that are in between. Thank you as always to our amazing patrons. You are absolutely wonderful. And if you would like to be absolutely wonderful too, please consider supporting this channel on Patreon. Links are in the description, as well as links to some awesome Ribbon Lurks merch. Also, please consider hitting that subscribe button if you like our content and you haven't done so yet. We're really trying to get about 120 more subscribers to get to that big 5,000 number by our 4-year anniversary on March 15th. Alright, short but sweet, that's what I got on Fursonas versus characters. Hope you enjoyed it. We'll be back next week with more fuzzy fun. See you later.